The 2010 Champions League final had everything: tactics, drama, heartbreak, and history in the making. Bayern Munich were chasing their first European title in nearly a decade, playing beautiful and attacking football under Louis van Gaal. On the other side, Inter Milan, led by the mastermind José Mourinho, were desperate to end a 45-year wait for Champions League glory. This wasn't just about a trophy. It was about legacies. It was about Mourinho versus Van Gaal. It was about one team trying to complete a historic treble and another trying to rebuild its European dominance. Bayern Munich and their relationship with the Champions League. And let's be honest, before 2010, it was complicated. This was a club that had history, a club that had lifted the European Cup 4 times before, but after their 2001 triumph, things just fell apart. They were still running the show in the Bundesliga, but in Europe, it was disaster. After 2007, they were torn apart by AC Milan, losing 4-2 on aggregate. And then there was 2009. Oh boy, if you were a Bayern fan, you probably still have nightmares about that one. Barcelona crushed them 5-1 on aggregate, and by halftime of the first leg, it was already 4-0. It was brutal, humiliating, and a clear sign that Bayern were no longer part of Europe's elite. Something had to change, and in true Bayern fashion, they didn't waste time sulking. Instead, they rebuilt. Louis van Gaal arrived as a man with a big personality and an even bigger belief in his football philosophy. He wasn't just here to win, he was here to build something. He promoted Thomas Müller, a kid from the youth team who had become one of the club's greatest ever players. He trusted Holger Badstuber in defense, and more importantly, he unleashed Arjen Robben and Frank Ribery on the wings. With those two terrorizing wingers, Bayern suddenly looked like a force again. But here's the thing, Bayern almost didn't make it past the group stage. They were that close to dropping into the Europa League. They finished second in their group behind Bordeaux. Yes, Bordeaux. And at one point it looked like Juventus would knock them out. But then came one of those defining moments. Bayern went to Turin needing a win and smashed Juve 4-1 in their backyard. That was the night things started to click. Then came the knockout rounds, and with them the drama. The round of 16 against Fiorentina had one of the best goals you'll ever see in a Champions League game. Bayern were losing on aggregate, but then Arjen Robben decided to take matters into his own hands. He picked up the ball, cut inside from the right, classic Robben, and unleashed a rocket from 30 yards. Bang! Straight into the top corner. That goal alone carried them through on away goals. And then there was the quarter-final against Man United. Now, this one had history. Bayern still had painful memories of the 1999 final, the night United broke their hearts with 2 injury-time goals. This was their chance for revenge. The first leg in Munich was dramatic, with Olic scoring a last-minute winner to give Bayern a 2-1 lead. But the second leg? Absolute chaos. United came out firing and were 3-0 up inside 41 minutes. Old Trafford was bouncing. Bayern were shell-shocked, and it looked like history was repeating itself. But then, Olic pulled one back right before halftime, giving Bayern a glimmer of hope. And then came the moment. A corner was swung in, the ball rolled out to Robben on the edge of the box, and with one sweet strike, he volleyed it perfectly into the bottom corner. Old Trafford fell silent. Bayern were through on away goals, and United were out. After surviving 2 intense knockout rounds, the semi-final against Lyon almost felt too easy. Bayern dominated, winning 4-0 on aggregate, with Olic scoring a hat-trick in the second leg. Just like that, after years of frustration, heartbreak and rebuilds, Bayern was back in the Champions League final. But here is where things got tricky. Bayern had played brilliant football to get to Madrid, but they had one massive problem. Frank Ribery was suspended. Their most creative player was out, and now they had to face one of the most well-organized and disciplined teams in football history. Would Robben be enough? Could young Thomas Müller step up to the biggest stage? They were about to find out. But before we get to the final, let's talk about their opponents. Because Inter Milan, their journey to Madrid was just as intense. And for them, this wasn't just about a trophy. It was about erasing decades of pain. This was a club with history, a club that had won back-to-back European Cups in the 1960s under Helenio Herrera. But after that, decades of heartbreak. They watched their city rivals AC Milan dominate Europe in the late 80s and early 2000s, while they struggled to even make an impact. It was frustrating. Every time they thought they were onto something, they collapsed. Let's take a trip down memory lane, and trust me, if you're an Inter fan, you might want to look away. In 1998, they had Ronaldo. Yes, that's Ronaldo, but still lost to Schalke in the UEFA Cup final. In 2003, they finally reached the semi-finals of the Champions League, only to get knocked out by AC Milan on away goals. That one stung, especially since both legs were played at the San Siro. Then came 2005, another nightmare against Milan. This time they were schooled, and their fans started throwing flares onto the pitch. A total embarrassment. And 2007? A shocking defeat to Valencia that ended in a mass brawl. So when José Mourinho arrived in 2008, Inter were desperate. They were dominating Serie A, winning 3 straight league titles, but in Europe, it was still the same old story. Disappointment after disappointment. And when they got knocked out in the round of 16 by Man United in 2009, Mourinho knew he had work to do. That summer, he made some huge changes. He let go of Zlatan Ibrahimovic, their best player, and brought in Samuel Eto'o from Barcelona. Diego Milito arrived from Genoa, Wesley Sneijder from Real Madrid, and suddenly Inter weren't just an Italian powerhouse, they looked like a serious Champions League contender. Then came their journey to the 2010 final, and wow, it was an absolute roller coaster. The group stage wasn't smooth sailing at all. They barely made it through, finishing second behind Barcelona. And speaking of Barca, that's where things get interesting. Because if you ask any Inter fan what made this Champions League run so special, they won't just mention the final. They'll talk about that semi-final against Pep Guardiola's Barcelona. But before that, there was Chelsea. Inter versus Chelsea in the round of 16 was personal. Mourinho was returning to Stamford Bridge for the first time since he left in 2007, and you just knew he wanted to prove a point. And he did. Inter won 2-1 at the San Siro, then went to London and put in a defensive masterclass, winning 1-0 thanks to a goal from Eto'o. Mourinho celebrated like he had just won the entire tournament, but honestly, that was just the beginning. Then came CSKA Moscow in the quarter-finals, and Inter made light work of them, winning both legs 1-0. It was the calm before the storm because what came next was one of the greatest semi-finals in Champions League history. Inter versus Barcelona, Mourinho versus Guardiola. This wasn't just any Barcelona side, this was peak tiki-taka Barcelona, the team that had just won everything. The first leg in Milan was absolutely wild. Barcelona scored first through Pedro, and it looked like they were about to dominate, but Inter wasn't having it. They fought back, hit Barca on the counter, and scored 3 times. Milito was unplayable. Sneijder was running the show. It ended 3-1, and suddenly Barcelona were in serious trouble. The second leg, that was pure Mourinho. If the first leg was about attacking brilliance, the second leg was all about defensive resilience. Inter went to Camp Nou and parked the bus. And when I say park the bus, I mean they locked it, threw away the keys, and built a brick wall around it. Barcelona had all the possession in the world, but they couldn't break through. Inter played the last 30 minutes with 10 men after Thiago Motta got sent off, but they held on. Barcelona scored late through PK, but it wasn't enough. Inter went through, and Mourinho ran onto the pitch like a madman, celebrating in front of the Barcelona fans. That moment alone was legendary. After years of frustration, heartbreak, and coming so close, Inter had finally made it to the Champions League final. But now, they had to finish the job. Standing in their way, Bayern Munich, a team that was just as hungry for European glory. This was it, the biggest game in Inter's modern history. The two teams coming into the match had 2 very different ideologies. Van Gaal was the idealist, the man obsessed with possession, positional play, and attacking football. Mourinho? He was a pragmatist, the ultimate strategist, the guy who didn't care how his team won, as long as they did win. And the way they set up before the final reflected their footballing ideologies perfectly. Let's start with Bayern Munich. Van Gaal's Bayern were all about ball control. He drilled this team to dominate possession, overload the midfield, and suffocate opponents by keeping the ball for as long as possible. Bayern usually set up in a 4-2-3-1, with a midfield that revolved around Bastian Schweinsteiger. The German was the heart of Bayern's play, dictating tempo, controlling the ball, and linking everything together. Alongside him was Mark van Bommel, the tough, no-nonsense captain who added steel to the midfield. Further forward, Bayern had one of the most dangerous attacking trios in Europe: Arjen Robben, Thomas Müller, and Ivica Olic. Robben was the main weapon. Everyone knew what he was going to do: cut inside from the right onto his left foot. But stopping him was another thing entirely. Müller, playing as a number 10, was the space invader, always making intelligent runs and dragging defenders out of position. And then there was Olic, the hard-working forward who never stopped pressing and always popped up in the right place at the right time. But Mourinho's Inter were entirely different. This was a team built for one thing: winning. Mourinho's approach to this football wasn't about possession. It wasn't about playing beautiful football. It was about being ruthless. Inter lined up in their signature 4-2-3-1, but the entire system was designed to absorb pressure and strike when the moment was right. The defensive core of the team was unbreakable. Júlio César in goal, Lucio and Walter Samuel as the centre-back pairing, and Kivu at left-back. These guys were warriors. They lived for these types of games. In midfield, Mourinho used Esteban Cambiasso, Zanetti, and Thiago Motta as his defensive shields, breaking up Bayern's attacks before they could even start. Schneider, the playmaker, had the freedom to pull the strings and create magic whenever Inter won the ball back. But the real key to Mourinho's tactics? Samuel Eto'o and Goran Pandev. These two weren't just attacking wingers in this system, they were defensive wingers. Their job was to help Inter stay compact, track Bayern's fullbacks, and make sure Robben and Müller never got an inch of space. And then, of course, there was Milito, the perfect striker for a Mourinho team. Intelligent, clinical, and capable of finishing any chance he got. Mourinho's plan was simple but brilliant. Let Bayern have the ball, stay compact, force them wide, and then counter-attack with precision. Bayern were used to teams pressing them, trying to fight for possession. But Mourinho didn't care about possession. He knew Bayern's biggest weakness was their high defensive line, and he set up Inter to exploit it. So before a ball was even kicked, you had two completely different game plans colliding. Bayern's possession and attacking dominance versus Inter's defensive discipline and lethal counterattacks. One team wanted to dictate the game, the other, they wanted to control it in their own way. And as we saw on the night, one of these tactics worked to perfection. From the first whistle, Bayern did exactly what Van Gaal had drilled into them all season. They dominated the ball, controlled possession, and tried to stretch Inter's defense. Arjen Robben, their danger man, was seeing a lot of the ball, constantly cutting inside onto that magical left foot. But Inter was ready. Every time Robben got a touch, he had two players closing him down. Samuel Eto'o and Goran Pandev, normally attackers, were doubling up on the wings to make sure Bayern couldn't break through. Despite all their possession, Bayern weren't hurting Inter. They were passing the ball around, looking for openings, but Inter's defense was a brick wall. Every pass into the box? Blocked. Every cross? Cleared. Every shot? Closed down before it could even get dangerous. Mourinho's game plan was working to perfection. And then, just like he wanted, Inter struck like lightning. Minute 35, a moment of pure counter-attacking brilliance. Júlio César launched the ball up the field. Diego Milito, the man who would become immortal in Inter history, controls it perfectly. With one quick pass, he lays it off to Wesley Sneijder, the brains of the operation. Sneijder, with his vision, picks the perfect moment to slip the ball back to Milito, who's now through on goal. One-on-one with Hans-Jörg Butt. The stadium holds its breath. Milito doesn't even hesitate. Boom! Right foot, bottom corner, goal! Inter explode. Bayern are stunned. They'd been controlling the game, and yet in one move, they were behind. And that's what made this Inter team so deadly. They didn't need the ball to hurt you, they just needed one chance. The first half ends, and Van Gaal knows he has to change something. Bayern had been better on the ball, but they had nothing to show for it. Mourinho, meanwhile, was calm as ever. His team was playing exactly the way he wanted. Then came the second half. Bayern came out firing. They knew they had to step it up, and finally they got their golden chance. Robben cuts inside from the right, again. He's been trying it all night, but this time he gets it just right. A perfect curling shot heading straight for the bottom corner. This is it. This is Bayern's moment. But no. Out of nowhere, Júlio César dives at full stretch and gets just enough on it to push it wide. What a save. Bayern can't believe it. That was their equaliser, and somehow the Brazilian keeper denied it. Mourinho claps from the touchline because he knows that was the moment Bayern needed and they didn't take it. And when you don't take your chances against a team like Inter Milan, you get punished. Minute 70, Milito again, and this time it's all him. He receives the ball near the edge of the box, with Martin Demichelis marking him tightly. But watch this. One quick feint, a brutal turn, and Demichelis is completely lost. Milito is through, and once again, it's just him and But. This time, he doesn't blast it. Oh no, he shoots it. The audacity, the calmness, the sheer brilliance. The ball floats over the keeper and nestles into the net. 2-0, game over. Inter fans lose it. The players pile on top of Milito. Mourinho pumps his fists on the sideline. This is it. They know it now. Bayern tries, but there's no way back. Inter's defense is too solid, and their confidence is too high. They smell history, and when the final whistle blows, it happens. Inter Milan are champions of Europe. Mourinho sprints onto the pitch, arms raised, his ultimate moment of glory. The players collapse in joy, in disbelief, in history. It's done. They've won the treble, the first Italian team to ever do it. For Bayern, it's heartbreak. But for Inter, it's immortality. And for Diego Milito, it's the night he became a legend. This was historic. The final wasn't just about lifting the Champions League trophy, it was about legacy. It was about rewriting history. Inter Milan, a club with so much tradition, had waited 45 years to reclaim the European throne. And when they finally did it, they did it in a way no other Italian team had ever done it before. A treble. That word alone carries weight. Before this night, only 5 teams in history had pulled it off. But now, Inter had joined that elite group. For Italian football, this was massive. The last time an Italian club won the Champions League, it was AC Milan in 2007. But a treble? No one had ever done it. Not Arrigo Sacchi's Milan, not Lippi's Juventus, not even the mighty Milan team of Maldini, Kaká and Shevchenko. This was a moment that put Inter at the pinnacle, not just of Italy but of Europe. They had dominated Serie A, conquered the Coppa Italia, and now they own the Champions League, the ultimate achievement. And yet, for all the glory, for all the celebrations, there was one man at the center of it all, fighting back tears. José Mourinho. The full-time whistle blew, and while the Inter players exploded in celebration, Mourinho stood still. He knew something the fans didn't want to accept. This was his last dance with Inter. He had taken them to the top of the football world, but this was goodbye. Cameras caught that unforgettable moment. Mourinho and Marco Materazzi locked in an emotional embrace. This wasn't just a coach and a player, this was a warrior saying farewell to the battlefield. Materazzi was in tears, Mourinho was in tears. They both knew it was over. Just days later, the inevitable happened. Mourinho was off to Real Madrid. He wasn't leaving because he wanted to. He was leaving because he had one more war to fight. Pep Guardiola's Barcelona had taken over the football world, and Mourinho was the only man who could challenge them. And just like that, Inter's hero was gone. He didn't even return to Milan for the celebrations. He knew if he did, he wouldn't be able to leave. It was that emotional. While Inter was at the peak of their powers, Bayern were left shattered. Losing a Champions League final is one thing, but losing when you've dominated possession, created chances, and still come up short? That hurts. Bayern had been the better team in the build-up, and yet on the night, they ran into a defensive wall and a striker who could not be stopped. But here's the thing about Bayern, they didn't stay down for long. This pain fueled them. Fast forward to 2012 and they were back in the final. This time it was at the home stadium, the Allianz Arena. Surely, this was their redemption arc. But then came more heartbreak. They dominated Chelsea, missed chance after chance. And then, Drogba happened. A bullet header, a dramatic equaliser, and the nightmare. Bayern lost on penalties. Another final, another heartbreak. But Bayern don't do self-pity. They learn, they adapt, and in 2013, they came back stronger. That loss to Inter in 2010 and the heartbreak of 2012 built something dangerous. Bayern returned to the final with a vengeance, and this time, they made no mistakes. They swept aside Barcelona 7-0 in the semi-finals. They met Borussia Dortmund in the final, and this time they got it right. Arjen Robben, the man who had missed that chance against Inter, finally delivered. Bayern won the Champions League, completing a treble of their own. The pain had turned into greatness. This wasn't just another Champions League final. It was a night that redefined history, legacies, and careers. Football is built on nights like these. Moments of triumph, heartbreak, and redemption. And that's why this final will always be remembered, not just as a game, but as a story that shaped the future of European football. So now, here's the question. Where does this final rank among the greatest in Champions League history? Well, let me know in the comments, and don't forget to check out our last video on the 2014 World Cup final. Thank you.